Hi guys, we are going to be starting our next kind of unit. It's not, I don't know if I'd call it a unit because we don't have vocab and stuff, but it's our next project. We're going to be doing Scratchboard, and usually I do Scratchboard. We do like practice with scratch paper. However, I'm not a fan of scratch paper, and I chose to not order more of it this year because I don't like it. And there's other ways you can use other things you can do to learn the technique. So what you need is some crayons for what for the techniques we're learning. You need to make sure you have a black. This is just a big one I had in my set. You don't have to have that big one, and just some other colors. So if you don't have that already, go ahead and grab that. Also up there, I've got some wooden styluses, and if you're at home, and a toothpick would work as well, or just something that you can kind of scratch with. So go ahead, and if you don't have that already, go ahead and pause this video and get that. And so here is kind of just so that if you don't know what Scratchboard is here's an example of one that I did a long time ago. Now this is actually not Scratchboard. Let me see. This is laminated, so I'm going to turn the light on. This can probably glare. Well, it does a little bit, but you can still see it. Anyways, this is an example I did a long time ago, and this is not Scratchboard. This is kind of a similar technique to what we're doing today. However, we use India ink instead of black crayon. But basically, you're going to be having this black image, and you're scratching away the highlights of your piece instead of the shadows, applying the shadows. So it's a little bit different as far as thinking that way. We're used to applying the dark, and this time we're going to be scratching away the light. So just something to kind of keep in mind while we are working through our lesson. Now, the techniques that we use for this, these are the techniques. We went over these last year in Art 1, and this is kind of the sheet we did together in our sketchbook when we talked about the different pencils. We also talked about all the different shading techniques, which we obviously will not be able to use blended pencil point and blended pencil side for this. We are going to be using all of these other techniques to do this, okay? So we're gonna do a little sheet where we work through these techniques, but just kind of a reminder, you overlap more. So when you want it to be more scratched away, in this version, the darker we would apply more, and then we'd space it out to get the lighter. So it's going to be reversed in Scratch Art. It's going to be the more light we want, the more overlapping we'll do. The darker we want, the more spaced out it'll be. So anyways, what we're going to do is go ahead and grab a color or two, and you can do a little fade in your colors if you want, or you can just do solid blocks of color. But the first thing we're going to be doing, the first technique, we'll go ahead and do hatching. So I would go ahead and label this. And you might label your page if you're doing it in your sketchbook as Scratch Art Techniques. Okay, lovely handwriting, but whatever. So I'm going to start with the color I want it to scratch to, and you have to apply your crayon really heavy, okay? I want to have a fade of colors, so I'm gonna go really heavy pressure, overlapping really tight, and then I faded my yellow a little bit. I'm gonna take this orange, and I'm gonna go heavy on this end and fade. And you're probably gonna break some crayons while you do this because we have to push hard, and that's okay. If you have more crayons when you clean up, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Just make sure they all get put up if you're using my stuff. Don't just toss them. Don't leave them on the floor or whatever. Okay, so I have my color laid down really heavy. Now this is where I take my black, and I'm going to go over it on top of my color. So in my technique that I showed you in my example of my fish, instead of applying the black crayon on top, I used India ink, which if you're ever doing an independent study and you want to try it out, you could totally do it. The black that we're doing for our example today, you can see kind of leaves that crayon-y texture behind, but the India ink is a very solid. It's an ink, so it covers really nice and solid. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and lay all the colors down, and then we'll go back and we'll do the scratching. So I have my first one ready for hatching, and then the next one we'll do is cross hatching. Okay, I'm going to do a color. Now I'm going to probably not do darker tones, like a dark purple or really dark blue, just because with the contrast between that and the black, I don't think it would be as noticeable. Now, if you want something really subtle like that, you could, but I'm choosing not to, because I want the camera to be able to pick up the scratching just a little bit better. Again, heavy, heavy, heavy. All right, so now I'm going to go back on top with my black. Heavy again. So on our actual project, we'll be using scratch boards. You won't have to do all this prep work for it, but this is how we're going to learn the techniques. All right, my next one is going to be cross contour. And I'm going to do a little bit bigger block here because this is the one where you kind of have to have the shapes for it to be able to apply the cross contour. So I'm going to go a little bit bigger. I'm just going to do one solid color for this one. There we go. Even a little bit bigger. Just want to make sure I have room for all my shapes. Okay. So again, make sure you're following along with this. Those of you that are at home, you're going to have to upload a picture of this. Those of you at school, you'll have to show it to me. I'll walk around and look too, but you make sure I've seen that you've done this. Okay. All right, then we're going to do stippling. Ooh. I'll just do another solid color for this one too. But you don't have to. You can do 3 or 4 colors blending together. Okay. Again, just make sure it's heavy. And then my last one will be scumbling. I'll do a fade on this one. Now remember, if you're going to fade colors, just like we learned, you have to adjust the pressure in your hand, let it fade, and overlap it quite a bit. You see how far I'm overlapping one color into the other. That's just good blending techniques to always kind of keep in mind. Okay. Okay, so we have each of our little, again, this is kind of scratch art shading techniques. We have each of our techniques here now, and they're all labeled. So I've got my wooden stylus here, or my scratching tool. Again, if you don't have this available, you could use a toothpick. You could probably even use like your fingernail if you had to, or a paper clip or thumbtack or something like that. Just make sure you don't scratch through the paper, which I don't think you will. But all right, so I'm going to start with hatching. Hatching is, remember, this is just like lines all kind of going the same direction. They're just overlapping, okay? And this is what not to do, okay? So, something you have to kind of keep in mind with scratch art, you see how it just kind of scratches right off the top there. With scratch art, now I want you to try to get a fade, okay? So I'm going to try to go really light on this side, and I'm going to try to keep it darker as I fade out. I lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? There's no way, here's what I was going to say. There's no way to avoid texture in scratch art, okay? So again, I still have this texture from the crayon, which I'm not thrilled about for this, but it works well enough to learn the techniques. So again, I want really bright over here for my highlight, so I'm going to scratch, 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 layer, 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 overlap. And then I'm going to fade out by spacing my strokes out more, okay? Now with Scratchboard, you will have a metal tip stylus, okay? But it'll scratch, I think, pretty easy, just like this, as long as your tip is sharp. So this is pretty accurate. Okay, so that's hatching. You can still see my texture has gone there. I did not just stop it. So again, so that's hatching, overlapping lines one direction. Okay. Okay. So if you are not done with that, pause the video, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. So cross hatching is, I just really hate how it leaves that texture there. Okay. Anyways, so cross hatching is, you start like hatching, but you can crisscross in multiple different directions. So you can, like this, my example here, I started this one just like here, but then I went back and did it a different way. Now, there's also this option too, is the overlapping X's. That's another way to get cross hatching. And remember, these are the things to not do. You don't want to leave them really spaced out, okay? So, I'm going to start my scratching one direction. I'm going to fade this as I go as well. Again, this side I'm going where I'm wanting my highlight. And you could do it the other direction. It's just more comfortable. I'm a lefty, so it's more comfortable for me to go this direction. Okay. Crisscross. And you could do this on this page if you want to do it like the overlapping X's. That's fine too, as long as you get one of those techniques. Now I could go back and overlap this in a third direction. Like I could go another horizontal direction if I wanted to. As long as you're still scratching more where you want your highlight and less where you don't. Again, we have to think about this kind of in a backwards mindset as to what we're used to, okay? So you just kind of keep scratching until you get it where you want. And just like when we're shading with a pencil, you don't want to see just a hard stopping point. You know, like, okay, I scratched this section and then I stopped. That's not what you want to do. You still want it to fade. Okay. All right. Now I could just keep scratching until I get it as bright as I want. And again, the scratch paper will work, or the Scratchboard will work a little bit better. So that is cross hatching. And we'll go ahead and, actually, I'm gonna do cross contour last. So we have stippling and scumbling. Stippling is just the dots, okay? Or you could also kind of do like circles, or even like shapes, but you don't want, honestly, you probably would do better with just the dots. Now, the thing about stippling and scratch art is a dot on the paper is not going to, like if you were just doing this with ink pen or pencil and you just use the tip of your pencil, that you'd get marks on the paper. However, Scratchboard, you have to actually kind of scrape it, scratch it a little bit more. You just be careful. You still don't want it to get too liney like this, okay? So, but you do kind of have to do a little bit more of a stroke. I don't know if you can see that. It's kind of right here is where I'm working. This does not work super great with the crayon technique, but it is what it is. You should be able to see it well enough. So I'm just going to overlap my dots more. And then I'm going to space them out as I want it to fade. Again, I'm working in my highlights, not in my shadows. This is more good for, I mean, all these techniques are good for textures. So just space out your dots more as you want it to fade. You might, this probably would have turned out better if I would have used yellow instead of that. Pink is kind of a dark color for stippling, but with the crayon, but that's okay. Okay. Hopefully y'all can kind of tell. I'm just really kind of spacing out a little bit more as I go. I did not use stippling on my fish example. That was mainly cross-hatching, it was mainly cross-contour is what I did. So I'll show that again whenever we get to that. Okay, so scumbling, this is going to, I'm gonna do my scumbling this way this time, just because I've got my lighter tones over here. That'll probably work a little bit better for my highlight than my darker tone. So scumbling, that is the technique where it's just kind of like planned scribbling, scribbling on purpose. But again, here's the knot side, so don't get it so spaced out that it doesn't give you a value change. You got to kind of keep it tight and control the pressure in your hand as well to give you that controlled scribble. So over here, yeah, I think my poor choice on dark color under that one it did not work out super well. So I'm just kind of scribbling over here, and I'm going to let it kind of pressure in hand as well as spacing out all my strokes. Layers usually have to be made. I think that's where most students go wrong, is they think one time through is all it needs. Usually not. It's usually not the case. And that goes with anything, not just scratch art, but paint, color pencil. It just takes time, and that's okay. So anyways, I'm kind of just lightly scratching it off. That's another good like wool kind of texture. Okay. All right. So those are most of the shading techniques for this. Now let's talk about cross contour. Okay. Let me see if I can get those gaps to fill in just a little bit more before I go into this one. Okay. All right. So Cross contour, remember this is the one where we have to kind of flow our lines with our shape, okay? So if we have rounded objects, we want curved lines. If we have a flat object, we want straight lines. So here's a close-up example of my fish. I use, for the most part, cross contour, I think, is pretty much what I use throughout all of this. So like my individual scales, I did a lot more scratching towards the end, and then where they get overlapped by the previous scale, it kind of fades, but my lines curve with it. On these fins, they kind of curve with the shape. I say that might be a little bit more of hatching right there, but you can certainly tell on the face that my lines curve and flow with the object, and that helps give it form. So I would strongly suggest that probably use cross contour. You can certainly tell in the water too. Cross contour is going to probably help give you the better shape and form from this one. This is probably a little bit more of hatching with a bit of cross contour too, but you can see that they fade. I have a bunch more scratched off at the highlight, and where things start to overlap, I let it fade more into black. But again, your scratch board is just going to be one solid color. I custom made this for my image, so this takes longer to do, but if it's something you would like to try for an independent study with the India ink, I'd be happy to show you how to do that. But anyway, so cross contour, we're going to start with our circle. I'm going to make sure I have room for all of my shapes in here. I'll do my cone down here. These are just simple shapes to learn, to practice with. And I've got my cube. Cube there. Okay. So I'm going to remember I'm filling in the highlights, not the shadows. So if my light is coming from over here, then I'm going to let my highlights kind of flow brighter towards that. I'm going to start probably closer there. And then since this is a rounded object, I'm trying to use curved lines. And I'm going to let them slowly fade back. Now, the one thing that's kind of a negative on my example here is that I had to scratch out the shape first, and then that's going to leave this bright line where a shadow would be. So when we get into doing our project, I'm going to show you a different technique that won't make us have this bright highlight back here. And then say we have our shadow here, which is usually a little lighter farther away from our shape. And it's going to kind of fade in. We're going to do tomorrow, we're going to have a couple practice images. We're going to make another one of these on our own just to kind of practice an image doing this with this technique, with this crayon technique that we're using. I don't have enough of my actual scratch boards to let everybody, I don't know, I'll count and see if I have enough. Maybe I can cut some in half. But, so here on my cone, that's where my light's going to go. And I'm going to scratch away from that, and I'm going to, I try to like kind of start my scratcher where the highlight is strongest, and then I'll just kind of try to lift my stylus a little bit off the paper as I go, but sometimes it just catches a little bit different. But again, I'm trying to keep my lines slightly curved since this is a rounded object. Okay. Maybe a little bit more. See if I can carry it back a little bit farther. All right, so that's probably pretty good for my cone. So I'm gonna put on my box, I think I'm gonna put my light over here. And you can put your light wherever you want. But let's see. I had more room over there, I think. So I'm going to straight lines on my box. I'm going to kind of fade this down just slightly, because if that's hitting my corner, that's going to catch most of the light there. But I should still have a light on this side. Same thing for here. And then this side would probably be the darker side. But this is more about also just making sure you're letting your lines flow with the shape. Okay. So when you get this done, if you're at home, remember you need to upload a picture of your page, of your techniques, okay? Make sure they're labeled. And then if you're at school, you need to make sure you show me if I haven't already seen it. So, all right.